Can everybody hear that? Can you hear the music? Okay. I'm gonna turn the music down a little bit. Okay, so I also have something else because Angie is amazing and we've been reading the illustrated edition of Chamber of Secrets and I got this pretty box in the mail today, which I have not opened yet. I am just now opening this and taking out all of the stuff. And we have our third book to read next. Look at that! Oh, I can't wait to look through this and all the artwork. So our next Harry Potter book will also be read illustrated edition because Angie is amazing. Thank you so much. I am going to flip through this and look at the artwork later. I'm so excited. So excited. Okay. We're gonna keep the music nice and quiet in the background. Okay. So I apologize that I was a little bit late today because everybody and their mother decided they wanted to call me. There's a note in the box. There's a piece of paper. Oh, love you bunches, Angie, your true love. Oh, I love you too. Why couldn't that be written on the inside of the book? It doesn't seem fair. Now I'm gonna have to keep that receipt. You know that, right? Okay, we're gonna turn that down even more. Okay, actually, we're gonna turn that off for now. No, I kind of like the music on. Okay. Well, Target should work that way. It's bullshit. Bull poop. Bull crap. Okay. So, where were we? Oh, that's right! Filch's cat is hanging in the hallway under the sign that says, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." Air as in H-E-I-R, air. Why would I bring them on camera? That's not normal. Why would I bring you on camera? I'll wave at you though. Freya. Okay, sorry, I'm the only one here at home, so I might have to leave to go let the dog out, but I don't think so. She was just outside for a little while. Okay. So we are on chapter 9, The Writing on the Wall, and they have a picture of an old dude. Honestly, that kind of reminds me of, oh, what do you call that? A Christmas Carol. You know, it reminds me of those ghosty guys, but interesting. All right. What's going on here? What's going on? Attracted, no doubt, by Malfoy's shout, Argus Filch came shouldering his way through the crowd. Then he saw Mrs. Norris and fell back, clutching his face in horror. "My cat! My cat! What's happened to Miss Norris?" he shrieked. And then his popping eyes fell on Harry. "You!" he screeched. "You! You've murdered my cat! You've killed her! I'll kill you! Oh, Argus!" Dumbledore had arrived on the scene, followed by a number of other teachers. In seconds, he had swept past Harry, Ron, and Hermione and detached Mrs. Norris from the torch bracket. "Come with me, Argus," he said to Filch. "You too, Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, Miss Granger." Lockhart stepped forward eagerly. My office is nearest, Headmaster, just upstairs. Please feel free to... Thank you, Gilderoy, said Dumbledore. The silent crowd parted to let them pass. Lockhart, looking excited and important, hurried after Dumbledore. So did Professors McGonagall and Snape. As they entered Lockhart's darkened office, there was a flurry of movement across the walls. Harry saw several of Lockhart's in the process of dodging out of sight, their hair in rollers. The real Lockhart lit the candles on his desk and stood back. Dumbledore laid Mrs. Norris on the polished surface and began to examine her. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged tense looks and sank into chairs outside the pool of candlelight, watching. The tip of Dumbledore's long, crooked nose was barely an inch from Mrs. Norris's fur. He was looking at her closely through his half-moon spectacles, his long fingers gently prodding and poking. Professor McGonagall was bent almost as close, her eyes narrowed. Snape loomed behind them, half in shadow, wearing a most peculiar expression. It was as though he was trying hard not to smile. As Lockhart was hovering around all of them, making suggestions. It was definitely a curse that killed her, probably the transmorgraphian torture. That's a word. I've seen it used many times. So unlikely I wasn't there. I know the very counter-curse that would have saved her. Of course you do, you stuck-up prig. Lockhart's comments were punctuated by Filch's dry, racking sobs. He was slumped in a chair by the desk, unable to look at Mrs. Norris, his face in his hands. Much as he detested Filch, Harry couldn't help feeling a bit sorry for him, though not nearly as sorry as he felt for himself. If Dumbledore believed Filch, he would be expelled for sure. Dumbledore was now muttering strange words under his breath and tapping Mrs. Norris with his wand, but nothing happened. She continued to look as though she had been recently stuffed. I remember something very similar happening in Ogwadogu, said Lockhart. A series of attacks. A full story's in my autobiography. I was able to provide the townspeople with various amulets which cleared the matter up at once. The photographs of Lockhart on the wall were all nodding in agreement as he talked. One of them had forgotten to remove his hairnet. At last, Dumbledore straightened up. She's not dead, Argus, he said softly. Lockhart stopped abruptly in the middle of counting the number of murders he had prevented. Not dead? Croaked Filch, looking through his fingers at Mrs. Norris. But why is she all stiff and frozen? She's been petrified, said Dumbledore. Ah, I thought so, said Lockhart. But how, I cannot say. Ask him, screeched Filch, turning his blotched and tear-stained face to Harry. No second year could have done this, said Dumbledore firmly. It would take dark magic of the most advanced. He did it! He did it! Filch spat, his pouchy face purpling. You saw what he wrote on the wall. He found it in my office. He knows I'm a... Filch's face worked horribly. He knows I'm a squib, he finished. I never touched Miss Norris, Harry said loudly, uncomfortably aware of everyone looking at him, including all the Lockharts on the walls. And I don't even know what a squib is. Rubbish, snarled Filch. He saw my quick spell letter. If I might speak, Headmaster, said Snape from the shadows, and Harry's sense of foreboding increased. He was sure nothing Snape had to say was going to do him any good. Potter and his friends may have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, he said, a slight sneer curling his mouth as though he doubted it. But we do have a set of suspicious circumstances here. Why were they in that corridor at all? Why weren't they at the Halloween feast? Harry, Ron, and Hermione all launched into an explanation about the Death Day party. There were hundreds of ghosts. They'll tell you we were there. But why not join the feast afterwards, says Snape, his eyes glittering in the candlelight. Why go up that corridor? Ron and Hermione looked at Harry. Because, Harry said, his heart thumping very fast. Something told him it would sound very far-fetched if he told them he'd been led there by a bodiless voice no one but he could hear. "Because we were tired and wanted to go to bed," he said. "Without any supper?" said Snape, a triumphant smile flickering across his gaunt face. "I don't think ghosts provide food fit for living people at their parties." "We weren't hungry," said Ron loudly, as his stomach gave a huge rumble. Snape's nasty smile widened. "I suggest, Headmaster, that Potter is not being entirely truthful," he said. "It might be a good idea if he were deprived of certain privileges until he's ready to tell us the whole story. I personally feel he should be taken off the Gryffindor Quidditch team until he's ready to be honest." "Really, Severus," said Professor McGonagall sharply, "I see no reason to stop the boy playing Quidditch. This cat wasn't hit over the head with a broomstick. There is no evidence at all that Potter has done anything wrong." Dumbledore was giving Harry a searching look. His twinkling light blue gaze almost made Harry feel as though he was being X-rayed. "Innocent until proven guilty, Severus." Snape looked furious. So did Filch. "My cat has been petrified!" he shrieked, his eyes popping. "I want to see some punishment!" "We will be able to cure her, Argus," said Dumbledore patiently. "Professor Sprout recently managed to procure some mandrakes. As soon as they have reached their full size, I will have a potion made which will revive Mrs. Norris." "I'll make it," Lockhart butted in. "I must have done it 100 times. I could whip a mandrake restorative draught in my sleep." "Excuse me," said Snape icily, "but I believe I am the potions master at this school." There was an awkward pause. "You may go," Dumbledore said to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. And they went, as quickly as they could, without actually running. When they were a floor up from Lockhart's office, they turned into an empty classroom and closed the door quietly behind them. Harry squinted at his friends' darkened faces. "Do you think I should have told them about the voice I heard?" "No," said Ron without hesitation. "Hearing voices no one else can isn't a good sign, even in the wizarding world." Something in Ron's voice made Harry ask, "You do believe me, though, don't you?" "Course I do," said Ron quickly. "But you must admit, it's weird." "I know it's weird," said Harry. "The whole thing's weird. What was that writing on the wall about? 'The chamber has been opened.' What's that supposed to mean?" "You know, it sort of rings a bell," said Ron slowly. "I think someone told me a story about a secret chamber at Hogwarts once. It might have been Bill." "And what on earth is a squib?" said Harry. To his surprise, Ron stifled a snicker. "Well, it's not funny, really, but as it's Filch," he said, "a squib is someone who is born into a wizarding family but hasn't got any magic powers. Kind of the opposite of muggle-born wizards, but squibs are quite unusual. If Filch is trying to learn magic from a quick spell course, I reckon he must be a squib. It would explain a lot, like why he hates students so much." Ron gave a satisfied smile. "He's bitter." A clock chimed somewhere. "Midnight," said Harry. "We better get to bed before Snape comes along and tries to frame us for something else." For a few days, the school could talk of little but the attack on Mrs. Norris. Filch kept it fresh in everyone's mind by pacing the spot where she'd been attacked, as though he thought the attacker might come back. Harry had seen him scrubbing the message off the wall with Mrs. Scour's all-purpose magical mess remover, but to no effect. The words still gleamed as brightly as ever on the stone. When Filch wasn't guarding the scene of the crime, he was skulking red-eyed through the corridors, lunging out at unsuspecting students, and trying to put them in detention for things like breathing too loudly or looking happy. Ginny Weasley seemed very disturbed by Mrs. Norris's face. According to Ron, she was a great cat lover. "But you hadn't really got to know Mrs. Norris," Ron told her bracingly. "Honestly, we're much better off without her." Ginny's lip trembled. "Stuff like this doesn't happen often at Hogwarts," Ron assured her. "They'll catch the nutter who did it and have him out of here in no time. I just hope he's got time to petrify Filch before he's expelled. I'm only joking, Ron added hastily as Ginny blanched. The attack had also had an effect on Hermione. It was quite unusual for Hermione to spend a lot of time, or it was quite usual for Hermione to spend a lot of time reading. But she was now doing almost nothing else, nor could Harry and Ron get much response from her when they asked what she was up to. It was not until the following Wednesday did they find out. Harry had been held back in potions, where Snape had made him stay behind to scrape tube worms off the desks. Ew. After a hurried lunch, he went upstairs to meet Ron in the library, and he saw Justin Finch-Fletchley, the Hufflepuff boy from herbology, coming towards him. Harry had just opened his mouth to say hello when Justin caught sight of him, turned abruptly, and sped off in the opposite direction. Weird. Harry found Ron at the back of the library, measuring his history of magic homework. Professor Binns had asked for a 3-foot-long composition on the medieval assembly of European wizards. I don't believe it. I'm still 8 inches short, said Ron furiously, letting go of his parchment, which sprung back into a roll. And Hermione's done 4 foot 7 inches, and her writing's tiny. Where is she? asked Harry, grabbing a tape measure and unrolling his own homework. Somewhere over there, said Ron, pointing along the shelves, looking for another book. I think she's trying to read the whole library before Christmas. Harry told Ron about Justin Finch-Fletchley running away from him. Dunno why you care. I thought he was a bit of an idiot, said Ron, scribbling away, making his writing as large as possible. Oh, that rubbish about Lockhart being so great. Hermione emerged from between the bookshelves. She looked irritable and at last seemed ready to talk to them. All the copies of Hogwarts A History have been taken out, she said, sitting down next to Harry and Ron, and there's a 2-week waiting list. I wish I hadn't left my copy at home, but I couldn't fit it in my trunk with all of Lockhart's books. Why do you want it? Said Harry. The same reason everyone else wants it. Hermione. Said Hermione, to read up on the legend of the Chamber of Secrets. What's that? Said Harry quickly. That's just it. I can't remember, said Hermione, biting her lip. And I can't find the story anywhere else. Hermione, let me read your composition, said Ron desperately, checking his watch. No, I won't, said Hermione, suddenly severe. You've had 10 days to finish it. I only need another 2 inches. Go on. The bell rang. Ron and Hermione led the way to History of Magic, bickering. You, lay down. Oh my goodness. Come on. It's a box, dum-dum. Come on. Lay down. Good girl. Freya. Stop it. No. Okay. History of Magic was the dullest subject on their timetable. Professor Binns, who taught it, was their only ghost teacher, and the most exciting thing that ever happened in his class was his entering the room through the blackboard. Ancient and shriveled, many people said he hadn't noticed he was dead. He'd simply got up to teach one day and left his body behind him in an armchair in the front of the staff room fire. His routine had not varied in the slightest since. I hope they removed the body from the armchair, because that would be interesting. Today was as boring as ever. Professor Binns opened his notes and began to read in a flat drone like an old vacuum cleaner until nearly everyone in class was in a deep stupor. Occasionally coming around long enough to copy down a name or date, and then falling back asleep again. He had been speaking for half an hour when something happened that had never happened before. Hermione put up her hand. Professor Binns, glancing up in the middle of a deadly dull lecture on the International Warlock Convention of 1289, looked amazed. Miss, Granger, Professor, I was wondering if you could tell us anything about the Chamber of Secrets, said Hermione in a clear voice. Dean Thomas, who had been sitting with his mouth hung open, gazing out at the window, jerked out of his trance. Lavender Brown's head came up off her arms, and Neville's elbows slipped off his desk. Professor Binns blinked. My subject is history of magic, he said in a dry, wheezing voice. I deal with facts, Mrs. Granger, not myths and legends. He cleared his voice with a small noise like chalk snapping and continued. In September of that year, a subcommittee of Sardinian sorcerers... He stuttered to a halt. Hermione's hand was waving in the air again. Miss Grant! Please, sir, don't legends always have basis in facts? Professor Binns was looking at her in such amazement, Harry was sure no student had ever interrupted him before, alive or dead. Well, said Professor Binns slowly, yes, one could argue that, I suppose. He peered at Hermione as though he had never seen a student properly before. However, the legend of which you speak is such a very sensational, even ludicrous tale. But the whole class was now hanging on Professor Binns' every word. He looked dimly at them all. Every face turned to his. Harry could tell he was completely thrown by such an unusual show of interest. Oh, very well, he said slowly. Let me see. The Chamber of Secrets. You all know, of course, that Hogwarts was founded over 1,000 years ago. The precise date is uncertain, by the 4 greatest wizards and witches of the age. The 4 schoolhouses are named after them. Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. They built this castle together, far from prying Muggle eyes, for it was an age when magic was feared by common people, and witches and wizards suffered much persecution. He paused, gazing blearily around the room, and continued. For a few years, the founders worked in harmony together, seeking out youngsters who showed signs of magic and bringing them to the castle to be educated. And then, disagreements sprung up between them. A rift began to grow between Slytherin and the others. Slytherin wished to be more selective about the students admitted to Hogwarts. He believed that magical learning should be kept within all magic families. He disliked taking students of Muggle parentage, believing them to be untrustworthy. After a while, there was a serious argument on the subject between Slytherin and Gryffindor, and Slytherin left the school. Professor Binns paused again, pursing his lips, looking like a wrinkled old tortoise. Reliable historical sources tell us this much, he said, but these honest facts have been obscured by the fanciful legend of the Chamber of Secrets. The story goes that Slytherin had built a hidden chamber in the castle, of which the other founders knew nothing. Slytherin, according to the legend, sealed the Chamber of Secrets so that no one would be able to open it until his own true heir arrived at the school. The heir alone would be able to unseal the Chamber of Secrets, unleashing the horror within and using it to purge the school of all who were unworthy to study magic. There was a silence as he finished telling the story, but it wasn't the usual sleepy silence that filled Professor Binns' classes. There was an unease in the air as everyone continued to watch him, hoping for more. Professor Binns looked faintly annoyed. The whole thing is arrant nonsense, of course, he said. Naturally, the school has been searched for evidence of such a chamber many times, but the most learned witches and wizards, by the most learned witches and wizards, it does not exist. A tale told to frighten the gullible. Hermione's hand was back in the air. Sir, what exactly do you mean by the horror within the chamber? That is believed to be some sort of monster which the heir of Slytherin alone can control, said Binns in his dry, reedy voice. The class exchanged nervous looks. I tell you, the thing does not exist, said Professor Binns, shuffling his notes. There is no chamber and no monster. But, sir, said Seamus Finnegan, if the chamber can only be opened by Slytherin's true heir, no one else would be able to find it, would they? Nonsense, O'Flaherty, said Professor Binns in an aggravated tone. If a long succession of Hogwarts headmasters and headmistresses haven't found the thing... But, Professor, piped up Parvati Patel, you probably have to use dark magic to open it. Just because a wizard doesn't use dark magic doesn't mean he can't, Miss Pennyfeather, snapped Professor Binns. I repeat, if the likes of Dumbledore... But maybe you've got to be related to Slytherin, so Dumbledore couldn't, began Dean Thomas, but Professor Binns had had enough. That will do, he said sharply. It is a myth. It does not exist. There is not a shred of evidence that Slytherin ever built so much as a secret broom cupboard. I regret telling you such a foolish story. We will return, if you please, to history, to solid, believable, verifiable facts. Within 5 minutes, the class had sunk back into its usual stupor. I always knew Salazar Slytherin was a twisted old loony, Ron told Harry and Hermione as they found their way through the teeming corridors at the end of the lesson to drop off their bags before dinner. But I never knew he started that pureblood stuff. I wouldn't be in his house if you paid me. Honestly, if the Sorting Hat had tried to put me in Slytherin, I'd have gotten the train straight back home. Hermione nodded fervently, but Harry didn't say anything. His stomach had dropped unpleasantly. Harry had never told Ron and Hermione that the Sorting Hat had seriously considered putting him in Slytherin. He could remember, as though it was yesterday, the small voice that had spoken into his ear when he placed the hat on his head a year before. You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head, and Slytherin would help you on your way to greatness, no doubt about that. But Harry, who had already heard of Slytherin's house reputation for turning out dark wizards, had thought desperately, "Not Slytherin, not Slytherin." And the hat had said, "Oh well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor." As they were shunted along in the throng, Colin Creevey went past. "Hiya, Harry!" "Hello, Colin," said Harry automatically. Harry! A boy in my class has been saying you're..." But Colin was so small he couldn't fight against the tide of people bearing him towards the Great Hall. They heard him squeak, "See ya, Harry!" and he was gone. "What's a boy in his class saying about you?" Hermione wondered. "That I'm Slytherin's heir, I suspect," said Harry, his stomach dropping another inch or so, as he suddenly remembered the way Justin Finch-Fletchley had ran away from him at lunchtime. "People here will believe anything," said Ron in disgust. The crowd thinned, and they were able to climb the next staircase without difficulty. "Do you really think there's a Chamber of Secrets?" Ron asked Hermione. "I don't know," she said, frowning. "Dumbledore couldn't cure Miss Norris, and that makes me think that whatever attacked her might not be, well, human." As she spoke, they turned a corner and found themselves at the end of the very corridor where the attack had happened. They stopped and looked. The scene was just as it had been that night, except that there was no stiff cat hanging from the torch bracket, and an empty chair stood against the wall bearing the message, "The chamber has been opened." "That's where Filch has been keeping guard," Ron muttered. They looked at each other. The corridor was deserted. "Can't hurt to have a poke around," said Harry, dropping his bag and getting to his hands and knees so he could crawl along, searching for clues. "Scorch marks," he said. "Here, and here." "Come look at this," said Hermione. "This is funny." Harry got up and crossed to the window next to the message on the wall. Hermione was pointing at the topmost pane, where around 20 spiders were scuttling, apparently fighting to get through a small crack in the glass. A long silvery thread was dangling like a rope, as though they had all climbed it in their hurry to get outside. "Have you ever seen spiders act like that?" said Hermione, wondering. "No," said Harry. "Have you, Ron?" "Ron?" He looked over his shoulder. Ron was standing well back from them and seemed to be fighting the impulse to run. "What's up?" said Harry. "I don't like spiders," said Ron tensely. "Huh, I never knew that," said Hermione, looking at Ron in surprise. "You've used spiders in potions loads of times." "I don't mind them dead," said Ron, who was carefully looking anywhere but at the window. "I don't like the way they move." Hermione giggled. "It's not funny," said Ron fiercely. "If you must know, when I was 3, Fred turned my teddy bear into a dirty great spider because I broke his toy broomstick. You wouldn't like them either if you'd been holding your bear and suddenly it had too many legs. And..." He broke off, shuddering. Hermione was obviously still trying not to laugh. Feeling they had better get off the subject, Harry said, "Remember all that water on the floor? Where'd that come from? Someone's mopped it up." "It was around here," said Ron, recovering himself to walk a few paces past Filch's chair, pointing. "Level with this door." He reached for the brass knob, but suddenly withdrew his hand as though he'd been burned. "What's the matter?" said Harry. "Nope, can't go in there," said Ron gruffly. "That's the girls' toilet." "Oh, Ron, there won't be anyone in there," said Hermione, standing up and coming over. "That's Moaning Myrtle's place. Come on, let's have a look." And ignoring the large "out of order" sign, she opened the door. It was the gloomiest, most depressing bathroom Harry had ever set foot in. Under a large cracked and spotted mirror were a row of chipped stone sinks. The floor was damp and reflected the dull light given off by the stubs of a few candles burning low in their holders. The wooden doors to the cubicles were flaked and scratched, and one of them was dangling off its hinges. Hermione put her finger to her lips and stepped off towards the end cubicle. When she reached it, she said, "Hello, Myrtle. How are you?" Harry and Ron went to look. Moaning Myrtle was floating in the cistern of the toilet, picking a spot on her chin. "This is a girls' bathroom," she said, eyeing Ron and Harry suspiciously. "They're not girls." "No," Hermione agreed. "I just wanted to show them how nice it is in here." She waved vaguely at the dirty old mirror in the damp floor. "Ask her if she saw something," Harry mouthed at Hermione. "Why are you whispering?" said Myrtle, staring at him. "Oh, nothing," said Harry quickly. We wanted to ask..." "I wish people would stop talking behind my back," said Myrtle, in her voice choked with tears. "I do have feelings, you know, even if I am dead." "No, Myrtle, no one wants to upset you," said Hermione. "Harry only..." Oh. That's Moaning Myrtle, guys. "Harry only... No one wants to upset me? That's a good one," howled Myrtle. "My life was nothing but misery at this place, and now people come along ruining my death." "We wanted to ask you if you'd seen anything funny lately," said Hermione quickly, "because a cat was attacked right outside your door on Halloween." "Did you see anyone near here that night?" said Harry. "I wasn't paying attention," said Myrtle dramatically. "Peeves upset me so much I came in here and tried to kill myself. And then, of course, I remembered that I'm already dead," said Ron helpfully. Myrtle gave a tragic sob, rose up in the air, turned over, and dived headfirst into the toilet, splashing water all over them and vanishing from sight. From the directions of her sobs, she had come to rest somewhere in the U-bend. Harry and Ron stood with their mouths open, but Hermione shrugged wearily and said, "Honestly, that was almost cheerful for Myrtle. Come on, let's go." Harry had barely closed the door on Myrtle's gurgling sobs when a loud voice made all 3 of them jump. "Ron!" Percy Weasley had stopped dead at the head of the stairs, prefect badge agleam, and an expression of complete shock on his face. "That's a girl's bathroom," he gasped. "What were you—" "Just having a look around," Ron shrugged. "Clues, you know." Percy swelled in a manner that reminded Harry forcefully of Mrs. Weasley. "Get away from there," he said, striding towards them and starting to chivvy them along, flapping his arms. "Don't you care what this looks like? Coming back here when everyone's at dinner? Why shouldn't we be here? Said Ron hotly, stopping short and glaring at Percy. Listen, we never laid a finger on that cat. That's what I told Ginny, said Percy fiercely, but she still seems to think that you're going to be expelled. I've never seen her so upset, crying her eyes out. You might think of her, all of the first years are thoroughly overexcited by this business. You don't care about Ginny, said Ron, whose ears were reddening now. You're just worried I'm going to mess up your chances of being head boy. 5 points from Gryffindor, Percy said tersely, fingering his prefect badge, and I hope it teaches you a lesson. No more detective work, or I'll write to Mum. He strode off, the back of his neck as red as Ron's ears. Harry, Ron, and Hermione chose seats as far as possible from Percy in the common room that night. Ron was still in a very bad temper and kept blotting his charms homework. When he reached absently for his wand to remove the smudges, it ignited the parchment. Fuming almost as much as his homework, Ron slammed the Standard Book of Spells Grade 2 shut. To Harry's surprise, Hermione followed suit. Who could it be, though? She said in a quiet voice, as though continuing a conversation they had just been having. Who'd want all the squibs and muggle-borns out of Hogwarts? Let's think, said Ron in mock puzzlement. Who do we know who thinks muggle-borns are scum? He looked at Hermione. Hermione looked back, unconvinced. If you're talking about Malfoy, of course I am, said Ron. You heard him. You'll be next, mudbloods. Come on, we've only got to look at his foul rat face to know it's him. Malfoy, the heir of Slytherin, said Hermione skeptically. I don't know. Look at his family, said Harry, closing his book too. The whole lot of them have been in Slytherin, and he's always boasting about it. They could easily be Slytherin's descendants. His father's definitely evil enough. They could have had a key to the Chamber of Secrets for centuries, said Ron, handing it down father to son. Well, said Hermione cautiously, I suppose it's possible. But how do we prove it? Said Harry darkly. There must be a way. There might be a way, said Hermione slowly, dropping her voice still further with a quick glance at the room across the room to Percy. Of course, it would be difficult and dangerous, very dangerous. We'd be breaking 50 school rules, I expect. If in a month or so you feel like explaining, you will let us know, won't you? Said Ron irritably. All right, said Hermione coldly. What we need to do is get inside the Slytherin common room and ask Malfoy a few questions without him realizing it's us. But that's impossible, Harry said as Ron laughed. No, it's not, said Hermione. All we need would be some polyjuice potion. What's that? Said Ron and Harry together. Snape mentioned it in class a few weeks ago. Do you think we've got nothing better to do in potions than listen to Snape? Muttered Ron. And it transforms you into somebody else. Think about it. We could change into 3 of the Slytherins. No one would know it was us. Malfoy would probably tell us anything. He's probably boasting about it in the Slytherin common room right now. If only we could hear him. This polyjuice stuff sounds a bit dodgy to me, said Ron, frowning. What if we were stuck looking like 3 of the Slytherins forever? No, it wears off after a while, said Hermione, waving her hand impatiently. But getting hold of the recipe will be difficult. Snape said it was in a book called Most Potent Potions, and it's bound to be in the restricted section of the library. The only way they were going to get that book out of the restriction. There was only one way to get that book out of the restricted section. You needed a signed note of permission from a teacher. Hard to say why we'd want the book, really, said Ron, if we weren't going to try and make one of the potions. I think, said Hermione, that if we made it sound as though we were just interested in theory, we might stand a chance. Oh, come on. No teacher's gonna fall for that, said Ron. They'd have to be really, really thick. All right. What time is it? We have plenty of time, right? We're gonna do another chapter. All right. Chapter 10. The Rogue Bludger. I like that bottle. If anybody finds a bottle like that, I would love to own it. I'll put it on my shelf. All right. My dog is very comfortable, curled up next to me while I'm reading a book. Since the disastrous episode of the Pixies, Professor Lockhart had not brought live creatures into class. Instead, he read passages from his books to them, and sometimes reenacted some of the more dramatic bits. He usually picked Harry to help him with these reconstructions. So far, Harry had been forced to play a simple Transylvanian villager, whom Lockhart had cured of a babbling curse, a yeti with a head cold, and a vampire who had been unable to eat anything except lettuce since Lockhart had dealt with him. Yeah, okay. Harry was hauled to the front of the class during their very next Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson, this time acting a werewolf. If he hadn't had a very good reason for keeping Lockhart in a good mood, he would have refused to do it. Nice loud howl, Harry. Ah, exactly. And then, if you'd believe it, I pounced, like this. Slammed him to the floor. Thus, with one hand, I managed to hold him down. With my other, I put my wand to his throat, and then I screwed up my remaining strength and performed the immensely complex Homophorus charm, and he let out a piteous moan. Go on, Harry. Higher, higher. Yep, that's good. The fur vanished. The fangs shrank. And he turned back into a man. Simple, yet effective. And another village will remember me forever as the hero who delivered them from the monthly terror of werewolf attacks. The bell rang and Lockhart got to his feet. Homework! Compose a poem about my defeat of the Wagga Wagga werewolf. Signed copies of Magical Mead to the author of the best one. The class began to leave. Harry returned to the back of the room where Ron and Hermione were waiting. Ready? Harry muttered. Wait till everyone's gone, said Hermione nervously. All right. She approached Lockhart's desk, a piece of paper clutched tightly in her hands, Harry and Ron right behind her. Professor Lockhart, Hermione stammered. Okay, if we lose signal at some point tonight, I apologize. It's because there's a thunderstorm going on. Lightning just flashed outside. Professor Lockhart, Hermione stammered. I wanted to get this book out of the library, just for background reading. She held out a piece of paper, her hand shaking slightly. But the thing is, it's in the restriction section of the library, so I need a teacher to sign for it. I'm sure it would help me understand what you say in Gadding with Ghouls about slow-acting venoms. Ah, Gadding with Ghouls, said Lockhart, taking the note from Hermione and smiling widely at her. Possibly my favorite book. You enjoyed it? Oh, yes, said Hermione eagerly. So clever, the way you trapped the last one with the tea strainer. I'm sure no one will mind me giving the best student of the year a little extra help, said Lockhart warmly, and he pulled out an enormous peacock quill. Yes, nice, isn't it? He said, misreading the revolting look on Ron's face. I usually save it for book signings. He scrawled an enormous loopy signature on the note and handed it back to Hermione. So, Harry, said Lockhart, while Hermione folded the note with fumbling fingers and slipped it into her bag. Tomorrow's the first Quidditch match of the season, I believe. Gryffindor against Slytherin, is it not? I hear you're a useful player. I was seeker, too. I was asked to try out for the national squad, but preferred to dedicate my life to the eradication of dark forces. Still, if ever you feel the need for a little private training, don't hesitate to ask. Always happy to pass along my expertise to less able players. Harry made an indistinct noise in his throat and then hurried off after Ron and Hermione. I don't believe it, he said as the three of them examined the signature on his note. He didn't even look at the book we wanted. That's because he's a brainless git, said Ron. But who cares? We've got what we needed. "He's not a brainless git," said Hermione shrilly as they ran towards the library. "Just because he said you were one of the best students of the year." Professor Gilderoy Lockhart. Good grief. Oh, you're making my leg go to sleep, baby girl. All right. They dropped their voices as they entered the muffled stillness of the library. Madame Pince, the librarian, was a thin, irritable woman who looked like an underfed vulture. "Most potent potions," she repeated suspiciously, trying to take the note from Hermione, but Hermione wouldn't let go. I was wondering if I could keep it," she said breathlessly. "Oh, come on," said Ron, wrenching it from her grasp and thrusting it at Madame Pince. "You'll get another autograph. Lockhart will sign anything if it stands still long enough." Madame Pince held the note up to the light as though determined to detect a forgery, but it passed the test. She stalked away between the lofty shelves and returned several minutes later carrying a large and moldy-looking book. Hermione put it carefully in her bag and they left, trying not to walk too quickly or look too guilty. 5 minutes later, they were barricaded in Moaning Myrtle's out-of-order bathroom once again. Hermione had overridden Ron's objections by pointing out that the last place anyone in their right minds would go, so they were guaranteed some privacy. Moaning Myrtle was crying noisily in her cubicle, but they were ignoring her, and she them. Hermione opened Most Potent Potions carefully, and the three of them bent over the damp, spotted pages. It was clear from a glance why it belonged in the restricted section. Some of the potions had effects almost too gruesome to think about, and there were some very unpleasant illustrations, which included a man who seemed to have been turned inside out, and a witch sprouting several extra pairs of arms out of her head. Honestly, I wouldn't mind having some extra arms. "Here it is," said Hermione excitedly as she found the page headed The Polyjuice Potion. It was decorated with drawings of people halfway through transforming into other people. Harry seriously hoped that the artist had imagined the look of intense pain on their faces. "This is the most complicated potion I've ever seen," said Hermione as they scanned the recipe. "Lacewing flies, leeches, fluxweed, and knotgrass," she murmured, running her fingers down the list of ingredients. "Why, they're easy enough. They're in the student store cupboard, and we can help ourselves. Ooh, look! Powdered horn of a bicorn. I don't know where we're going to get that. Shredded skin of a boomslang. That'll be tricky, too. And, of course, a bit of whoever we want to change into." "Excuse me," said Ron sharply. "What do you mean, a bit of whoever we're changing into? I'm drinking nothing with crab's toenails in it." Hermione continued as though she hadn't heard him. "We don't have to worry about that yet, though, because you add those bits last." Ron turned, speechless, to Harry, who added another worry. "Do you realize how much we're going to have to steal, Hermione? Shredded skin of boomslang? That's definitely not in the student cupboard. What are we going to do? Break into Snape's private stores? I don't know if that's a good idea." Hermione shut the book with a snap. "Well, if you're going to chicken out, fine," she said. There were bright pink patches on her cheeks, and her eyes were brighter than usual. "I don't want to break rules, you know. I think threatening Muggleborns is far worse than brewing up a difficult potion. But if you don't want to find out if it's Malfoy, I'll go straight to Madame Pince now and hand the book back in." "I never thought I'd see the day when you would be persuading us to break rules," said Ron. "All right, we'll do it. But not toenails, okay?" "How long does it take to make, anyway?" said Harry, as Hermione, looking happier, opened the book again. "Well, as the fluxweed has got to be picked at the full moon, and the lacewings have got to be stewed for 21 days, I'd say it'll be ready in about a month if we can get all the ingredients." "A month?" said Ron. "Malfoy could have attacked half the Muggleborns in the school by then." But Hermione's eyes narrowed dangerously again, and he added swiftly, "But it's the best plan we've got, so full steam ahead, I say." However, while Hermione was checking that the coast was clear for them to leave the bathrooms, Ron muttered to Harry, "It'll be a lot less hassle if you could just knock Malfoy off his broom tomorrow." Harry woke early on Saturday morning and lay for a quick while thinking about the upcoming Quidditch match. He was nervous, mainly at the thought of what Wood would say if Gryffindor lost, but also at the idea of facing a team mounted on the fastest racing brooms gold could buy. He had never wanted to beat Slytherin so badly. After half an hour of laying there with his insides churning, he got up, dressed, and went to breakfast early, where he found the rest of the Gryffindor team huddled at the long, empty table, all looking uptight and not speaking much. As 11 o'clock approached, the whole school started to make its way down the Quidditch stadium. It was a muggy sort of day, with a hint of thunder in the air. Ron and Hermione came hurrying over to wish Harry good luck as he entered the changing rooms. The team pulled on their scarlet Gryffindor robes and then sat down to listen to Malfoy's usual pre-game prep talk. "All right, Slytherin has better brooms than us," he began. "No point denying it. But we've got better people on our brooms. We've trained harder than they have. We've been flying in all weather." "Too true," muttered George Weasley. "I haven't been properly dry since August." "And we're going to make them rue the day they let that little bit of slime, Malfoy, buy his way onto the team." Chest heaving with emotion, Wood turned to Harry. "It'll be down to you, Harry, to show them that a seeker has to have something more than a rich father. Get that snitch before Malfoy or die trying. Because we've got to win today. We've got to." "No pressure, Harry," said Fred, winking at him. As they walked out onto the pitch, a roar of noise greeted them, mainly cheers, because Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were anxious to see Slytherin beaten. But the Slytherins in the crowd made their boos and hisses heard too. Madam Hooch, the Quidditch teacher, asked Flint and Wood to shake hands, which they did, giving each other threatening stares and gripping harder than was necessary. "On my whistle," said Madam Hooch. 3, 2, 1, and with a roar from the crowd to speed them upwards, the 14 players rose toward the laden sky. Harry flew higher than any of them, squinting around for the snitch. "All right there, Scarhead," said Malfoy, shooting underneath him as though to show off the speed of his broom. Harry had no time to reply. At that very moment, a heavy black bludger came pelting towards him. He avoided it so narrowly that he felt a ruffle in his hair as it passed. "Close one, Harry," said George, streaking past him with his club in his hand, ready to knock the bludger back towards a Slytherin. Harry saw George give the bludger a powerful whack in the direction of Adrian Pusey, but the bludger changed direction in midair and shot straight for Harry again. Harry dropped quickly to avoid it, and George managed to hit it hard towards Malfoy. Once again, the bludger swerved like a boomerang and shot at Harry's head. Harry put on a burst of speed and zoomed toward the end of the pitch. He could hear the bludger whistling along behind him. What was going on? Bludgers never concentrated on one player like this. It was their job to try and unseat as many people as possible. Fred Weasley was waiting for the bludger at the other end. Harry ducked as Fred swung at the bludger with all his might. The bludger was knocked off course. "That's done it!" Fred yelled happily, but he was wrong. As though it was magnetically attracted towards Harry, the bludger pelted after him once more, and Harry was forced to fly off at full speed. It was starting to rain. Harry felt heavy drops fall on his face, splattering onto his glasses. He didn't have a clue what was going on with the rest of the game until he heard Lee Jordan, who was commentating, say, "Slytherin lead, 60 points to 0. Slytherin's superior brooms were clearly doing their job. And meanwhile, the mad bludger was doing all it could to knock Harry out of the air. Fred and George were now flying so close to either side of him that Harry could see nothing at all except their flailing arms, and had no chance to look for the snitch, let alone catch it. "Someone's tampered with this bludger," Fred grunted, swinging his bat with all his might as it launched a new attack on Harry. "We need time out," said George, trying to signal to Wood and stop the bludger breaking Harry's nose at the same time. Wood obviously got the message. Madam Hooch's whistle rang out, and Harry, Fred, and George dived for the ground, still trying to avoid the mad Bludger. "What's going on?" said Wood, as the Gryffindor team huddled together while Slytherins in the crowd jeered. "We're being flattened. Fred, George, where were you when that Bludger stopped Angelina scoring?" "We were 20 feet above her, stopping the other Bludger from murdering Harry, Oliver," said George angrily. "Someone's fixed it. It won't leave Harry alone. It hasn't gone for anyone else all game. The Slytherins must have done something to it." "No, the Bludgers have been locked in Madam Hooch's office since our last practice. There was nothing wrong with them then," said Wood anxiously. Madam Hooch was walking towards them. Over her shoulder, Harry could see the Slytherin team jeering and pointing in his direction. "Listen," said Harry, as she came nearer and nearer. "With you two flying around me all the time, the only way I'm going to catch the snitch is if it flies up my sleeve. Go back to the rest of the team and let me deal with the rogue one." "Don't be thick," said George. "It'll take your head off." Wood was looking from Harry to the Weasleys. "Oliver, this is mad," said Alicia Spinnet angrily. "You can't let Harry deal with that thing on his own. Let's ask for an inquiry." "If we stop now, we'll have to forfeit the match," said Harry, "and we're not losing to Slytherin just because of a mad Bludger. Come on, Oliver, leave it. Tell them to leave me alone." "This is all your fault," George said angrily to Wood. "Get the snitch or die trying. What a stupid thing to tell him." Madam Hooch had joined them. "Ready to resume play?" she asked Wood. Wood looked at the determined look on Harry's face. Whew. There's Malfoy in the background. "All right," he said. "Fred, George, you heard Harry. Leave him alone and let him deal with the Bludger on his own." The rain was falling more heavily now. On Madam Hooch's whistle, Harry kicked hard into the air. Long checker. And heard the telltale whoosh of the Bludger behind him. Higher and higher Harry climbed. He looped and swirled, spiraled, zigzagged, and rolled. Slightly dizzy, he nevertheless kept his eyes wide open. Rain was speckling his glasses and ran up his nostrils as he hung upside down, avoiding another fierce dive from the Bludger. He could hear laughter from the crowd. He knew he must look very stupid, but the rogue Bludger was heavy and couldn't change direction as quickly as he could. He began a kind of roller coaster ride around the edges of the stadium, squinting through the silver sheets of rain to the Gryffindor goalposts, where Adrian Pusey was trying to get past Wood. A whistling in Harry's ear told him the Bludger had just missed him again. He turned right over and sped in the opposite direction. "Training for the ballet, Potter," yelled Malfoy, as Harry was forced to do a stupid kind of twirl in midair to dodge the Bludger. Off Harry fled, the Bludger trailing a few feet behind him. And then, glaring back at Malfoy in hatred, he saw it. The golden snitch. It was hovering inches above Malfoy's left ear. And Malfoy, busy laughing at Harry, hadn't seen it. For an agonizing moment, Harry hung in midair, not daring to speed towards Malfoy in case he looked up and saw the snitch. Wham! He'd stayed still a second too long. The Bludger had hit him at last, smacking into his elbow, and Harry felt his arm break. Dimly dazed by the searing pain in his arm, he slid sideways on his rain-drenched broom, one knee still cocked over it, his right arm dangling uselessly at his side. The Bludger came pelting back for a second attack, this time aiming at his face. Harry swerved out of the way, and one idea firmly lodged in his numb brain. Get to Malfoy. Through a haze of rain and pain, he dived for the shimmering, sneering face below him, and saw its eyes widen with fear. Malfoy thought Harry was attacking him. "What the?" he gasped, careening out of Harry's way. Harry took his remaining hand off his broom and made a wild snatch. He felt his fingers close on the cold snitch, but was now only gripping the broom with his legs, and there was a yell from the crowd below as he headed straight for the ground, trying hard not to pass out. With a splattering thud, he hit the mud and rolled off his broom. His arm was hanging at a very strange angle. Riddled with pain, he heard as though from a distance a good deal of whistling and shouting. He focused on the snitch, clutched in his good hand. "Ah," he said vaguely, "we've won," and he fainted. He came round, rain falling on his face, still laying on the pitch, with someone leaning over him. He saw a glitter of teeth. "Oh no, not you," he moaned. "Oh, doesn't know what he's saying," said Lockhart loudly to the anxious crowd of Gryffindors pressing around them. "Not to worry, Harry. I'm going to fix your arm." "No," said Harry. "I'll keep it like this, thanks." He tried to sit up, but the pain was terrible. He heard a familiar clicking noise nearby. "I don't want a photo of this, Colin," he said loudly. "All right, lie back, Harry," said Lockhart soothingly. "It's a simple charm I've used countless times." "Why can't I just go to the hospital wing?" said Harry through clenched teeth. "He really should, Professor," said a muddy Wood, who couldn't help grinning even though his seeker was injured. "Great capture, Harry. Really spectacular. You're the best yet, I'd say." "Your best yet." Oh my God, my nose is itching. Stop thinking about me. Through the thicket of legs around him, Harry spotted Fred and George Weasley wrestling the rogue Bludger into a box. It was still putting up a terrific fight. "Stand back," said Lockhart, who was rolling up his jade green sleeves. "No, don't," said Harry weakly. But Lockhart was twirling his wand, and a second later it was directed straight at Harry's arm. A strange and unpleasant sensation started at Harry's shoulder and spread all the way down to his fingertips. It felt as though his arm was being deflated. He didn't dare look at what was happening. He had shut his eyes, and his face was turned away from his arm. But his worst fears were realized as the people around him gasped, and Colin Creevey began clicking away madly. His arm didn't hurt anymore, but nor did it feel remotely like an arm. "Ah," said Lockhart. "Yes, well, that can happen sometimes. But the point is, the bones are no longer broken. That's the thing to bear in mind. So, Harry, just, toddle up to the hospital wing. Mr. Weasley, Miss Granger, would you escort him? And Madame Pomfrey will be able to, tidy you up a bit." Harry got to his feet. He felt strangely lopsided. Taking a deep breath, he looked down at his right side, where what he saw nearly made him pass out. Poking out of the end of his robes was what looked like a thick, flesh-colored rubber glove. He tried to move his fingers. Nothing happened. Lockhart hadn't mended Harry's bones. He had removed them. Madame Pomfrey wasn't at all pleased. "You should have come straight to me," she raged, holding up a sad, limp remainder of what, half an hour before, had been a working arm. "I can mend bones in a second, but growing them back—" "You will be able to, won't you?" said Harry desperately. "Oh, I'll be able to, certainly, but it will be painful," said Madame Pomfrey grimly, throwing Harry a pair of pajamas. "You'll have to stay the night." Hermione waited outside the curtain drawn around Harry's bed, while Ron helped him into his pajamas. "Come on." It took a while to stuff the rubbery, boneless arm into a sleeve. "Hey, do not eat my frog." "Yeah, I love you too." "How can you stick up for Lockhart now, Hermione, huh?" Ron called through the curtain as he pulled Harry's limp fingers through the cuff. If Harry had wanted a deboning, he would have asked. "Anyone could make a mistake," said Hermione. "It doesn't hurt any more, does it, Harry?" No, said Harry, but it doesn't do anything else either. Then he swung himself into bed as his arm flopped pointlessly. Hermione and Madame Pomfrey came around the curtain. Madame Pomfrey was holding a large bottle of something labeled Skelgro. You're in for a rough night, she said, pouring out a steaming beakerful and handing it to him. Regrowing bones is a nasty business. So was taking the Skelgro. It burned Harry's mouth and throat as it went down, making him cough and sputter. Still tut-tutting about dangerous sports and inept teachers, Madame Pomfrey retreated, leaving Ron and Hermione to help Harry gulp down some water. We won, though, said Ron, a grin breaking across his face. That was some catch you made. Malfoy's face. He looked ready to kill. I want to know how he fixed that Bludger, said Hermione darkly. We can add that to the list of questions we'll ask when we've taken the Polyjuice potion, said Harry, sinking back into his pillows. I hope it tastes better than this stuff. If it's got bits of Slytherins in it, you've got to be joking, said Ron. The door to the hospital wing burst open at that moment. Filthy and soaking wet, the rest of the Gryffindor team had arrived to see Harry. Unbelievable flying, Harry, said George. I've just seen Marcus Flint yelling at Malfoy. Something about having the snitch on top of his head and not noticing. Malfoy didn't seem too happy. They had brought cakes, sweets, and bottles of pumpkin juice. They gathered around Harry's bed and were just getting started on what promised to be a good party when Madame Pomfrey came storming over, shouting, This boy needs rest. He's got 33 bones to regrow. Ouch, ouch, ouch. And Harry was left alone with nothing to distract him from the stabbing pains in his limp arm. Oh, I'm going to need a drink of water for the next pot. Okay. Hours and hours later, Harry woke quite suddenly in the pitch darkness and gave a small yelp of pain. His arm felt full of large splinters. For a second, he thought that was what had woken him. Then, with a thrill of horror, he realized that someone was sponging his forehead in the dark. Get off, he said loudly, and then, Dobby! The house elf's goggling tennis ball eyes were peering at Harry through the darkness. A single tear was running down his long, pointed nose. Harry Potter came back to school, he whispered miserably. Dobby warned and warned Harry Potter. Ah, sir, why didn't you heed Dobby? Why didn't Harry Potter go back home when he missed the train? He heaved himself up onto his pillows and pushed Dobby's sponge away. What are you doing here, he said, and how do you know I missed the train? Dobby's lip trembled. Harry was seized by a sudden suspicion. It was you, he said slowly. You stopped the barrier letting us through. Indeed, sir, said Dobby, nodding his head vigorously, ears flopping. Dobby hid and watched for Harry Potter and sealed the gateway, and Dobby had to iron his hands afterwards. He showed Harry 10 long bandaged fingers. But Dobby didn't care, sir, for he thought Harry Potter was safe. And never did Dobby dream that Harry Potter would get to school another way. Oh, holy crap. It really is raining cats and dogs. Oh my goodness. Jesus. He rocked back and forward, shaking his ugly head. Dobby was so shocked when he heard Harry Potter was back at Hogwarts, he let his master's dinner burn. Such a flogging Dobby never had, sir. Harry slumped back onto his pillows. You nearly got Ron and me expelled, he said fiercely. You better clear off before my bones come back, Dobby, or I might strangle you. Dobby smiled weakly. Dobby is used to death threats, sir. Dobby gets them 5 times a day at home. He blew his nose on the corner of the filthy pillowcase he wore, looking so pathetic that Harry felt his anger ebb away in spite of himself. Why do you wear that thing? He asked curiously. This, sir, said Dobby, plucking at the pillowcase. 'Tis a mark of the house elf's enslavement, sir. Dobby can only be freed if his masters present him with clothes, sir. The family is careful not to pass Dobby even a sock, sir, for then he will be free to leave their house forever. Dobby mopped his bulging eyes and said suddenly, Harry Potter must go home. Dobby thought his bludger would be enough to make... Your bludger, said Harry, anger rising once more. What do you mean, your bludger? You made that bludger try and kill me? Not kill you, sir. Never kill you, Dobby shrieked. Dobby wants to save Harry Potter's life. Better sent home grievously injured than remain here, sir. Dobby only wanted Harry Potter hurt enough to be sent home. Oh, is that all? Said Harry angrily. I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you want me sent home in pieces. Oh, if Harry Potter only knew, Dobby groaned, more tears dripping onto his ragged pillowcase. If he only knew what he meant to us, to the lowly, the enslaved, us dredges of the magical world. Dobby remembers how it was when he who must not be named was at the height of his power, sir. We house elves were treated like vermin, sir. Of course, Dobby is still treated like that, sir, he admitted, drawing his face on the pillowcase. But mostly, sir, life has improved for my kind since you triumphed over he who must not be named. Harry Potter survived, and the Dark Lord's power was broken, and it was a new dawn, sir. And Harry Potter shone like a beacon of hope for those of us who thought the dark days would never end, sir. And now, at Hogwarts, terrible things are perhaps happening already, and Dobby cannot let Harry Potter stay here now that history is to repeat itself, now that the Chamber of Secrets is open once more. Dobby froze, horror-struck, and then grabbed Harry's water jug from his bedside table and cracked it over his head, toppling out of sight. A second later, he crawled back onto the bed, cross-eyed, muttering, Bad Dobby! Very bad Dobby! So there is a Chamber of Secrets, Harry whispered. And you say it's been opened before? Tell me, Dobby. He seized the elf's bony wrist as Dobby's hand inched towards the water jug. But I'm not Muggle-born. How can I be in danger from the chamber? Oh, sir, ask no more, poor Dobby, stammered the elf, his eyes huge in the dark. Dark deeds are planned in this place, but Harry Potter must not be here when they happen. Go home, Harry Potter, go home. Harry Potter must not meddle in this, sir. 'Tis too dangerous. Who is it, Dobby? Harry said, keeping a firm hold on Dobby's wrist to stop him from hitting himself with the water jug again. Who's opened it? Who opened it last time? Dobby can't, sir. Dobby can't. Dobby mustn't tell, squealed the elf. Go home, Harry Potter. Go home. I'm not going anywhere, said Harry forcefully. One of my best friends is Muggle-born. She'll be first in line if the chamber really has opened. Harry Potter risks his own life for his friends, moaned Dobby in a kind of miserable ecstasy. So noble, so valiant. But he must save himself. He must. Harry Potter must not. Dobby suddenly froze, his bat ears quivering. Harry heard it too. There were footsteps coming down the passageway outside. Dobby must go, breathed the elf, terrified, and there was a loud crack, and Harry's fist was suddenly clenched on thin air. He slumped back onto bed, his eyes on the dark doorway of the hospital wing as the footsteps drew nearer. That moment, Dumbledore was backing into the dormitory, wearing a long woolly dressing gown and a nightcap. He was carrying one end of what looked like a statue. Professor McGonagall appeared a second later, carrying its feet. Together they heaved it onto the bed. "Get Madame Pomfrey," whispered Dumbledore, and McGonagall hurried past the end of Harry's bed and out of sight. Harry lay quite still, pretending to be asleep. He heard urgent voices, and then Professor McGonagall swept back into view, closely followed by Madame Pomfrey, who was pulling a cardigan over her nightdress. He heard a sharp intake of breath. "What's happened?" Madame Pomfrey whispered to Dumbledore, bending over the statue on the bed. "Another attack," said Dumbledore. "Minerva found him on the stairs." "There were a bunch of grapes next to him," said Professor McGonagall. "We think he was trying to sneak in here to visit Potter." Harry's stomach gave a horrible lurch. Slowly and carefully, he raised himself up a few inches so he could look at the statue on the bed. A ray of moonlight across its staring face. It was Colin Creevey. His eyes were wide and his hands were stuck up in front of him, holding his camera. "Petrified?" whispered Madame Pomfrey. "Yes," said Professor McGonagall. "But I shudder to think, if Albus hadn't been on the way downstairs for hot chocolate, who knows what might have—" The three of them stared down at Colin. Then Dumbledore leaned forward and pressed the camera and prized the camera out of Colin's rigid grip. "You don't think he managed to get a picture of his attacker?" said Professor McGonagall eagerly. Dumbledore didn't answer. He pried open the back of the camera. "Good gracious!" said Madame Pomfrey. A jet of steam hissed out of the camera. Harry, 3 beds away, caught the acid smell of burnt plastic. "Melted," said Madame Pomfrey wonderingly. "All melted." "What does this mean, Albus?" Professor McGonagall asked urgently. "It means," said Dumbledore, "that the Chamber of Secrets is indeed open again." Madame Pomfrey clapped a hand over her mouth. Professor McGonagall stared at Dumbledore. "But Albus, surely, who?" "The question is not who," said Dumbledore, his eyes on Colin. "The question is how." And from what Harry could see of Professor McGonagall's shadowy face, she didn't understand this any better than he did. All right, that's it for tonight. Tomorrow we will start Chapter 11. Oh, that was an exciting chapter, wasn't it? How would you feel if you broke your arm and all of a sudden you didn't have any bones in it? I do not like Lockhart. He is seriously one of my least favorite characters. I understand you're not supposed to necessarily like him, but I really don't like him. Anyway, you guys have a wonderful evening. Thank you for listening. And again, Angie, thank you for my new book. I'm so excited. I'm going to write down the date it was received, and I'm totally going to stick that note in there from you, because I love you too. It's so pretty. I can't wait to get to the 3rd book. Let's hurry up and finish this one. All right. Yes, it was the Pirate Crawlin' Mystic. It was. I remember getting this shirt. I don't remember whether it was thrown at me, if I won it, if I picked it up, something. You want to see Moaning Myrtle again? All right, hang on. Ah, there she is. All right, there's Moaning Myrtle. And do you want to see Harry one more time? I actually really like this picture. With Malfoy in the background. I want to read this one. We're like sitting here parsing through the pictures. Oh, did I show you guys the Skelgrow? Did I show off that picture? Alright, let's go back here. Oh, it is! It's right there! Holy shit! Manny, you'd be a great seeker. It's right there. Alright guys, good night. Love you guys.